The good old days. Faiz Ahmed Faiz coined the slogan, "Great people to fly with," and despite everything that's happened since then, nobody ever thought to change it. You know, PIA isn't even allowed in most of these places anymore? For a sentimental nation like ours, the memory of a once promising venture conceived by Muhammad Ali Jinnah turned to a tragic tale of lost potential just resonates. Oh, and our national airline is also failing. Over the past couple of decades, PIA has been in the news for a lot of things, none of them positive. Right now, there's an attempt at privatization by the unelected government, lessors are cutting off ties, planes are being grounded and impounded, resources are being cut off, employees are protesting, there are hostile Senate hearings, and on and on. Add this to normal everyday inefficiencies like chronically delayed flights and downright unpleasant flying experiences, and PIA has accumulated some serious baggage over the years, which now stands way past its allowance. Everyone has heard the glorious tales of excellence, the almost mythical accounts of what PIA once was, what Pakistan lost along the way. So we don't really need to go over that ancient history again. What we really should know is, how did things get so bad, and is privatization the right choice? Let Samjo explain. Let's begin with the elephant in the cabin, PIA's financial state of woe. Turbulence in PIA's performance started being felt sometime in the 90s by most accounts. Competition started soaring once PIA lost their monopolies and duopolies in the domestic and international sectors. The airline that helped kickstart Emirates in 1985 began losing money to it, with operating losses increasing along with pilot strikes and vendor issues. This is largely remembered as the beginning of the reign of the famed unions, often called pressure groups, backed by political parties inside PIA. Although PIA, as the national carrier of Pakistan, was always tied in with the political. But we'll circle back to that. PIA's financials have pretty much been descending for decades. It's the government's highest loss making enterprise. Since the year 2000, PIA has only had 3 years where it's been profitable. And that was way back in the beginning of the century, in 2002, 2003, and 2004. Financial problems are actually the bottom line of what's plaguing Pakistan International Airlines. How all the other problems of staffing, politics, and reputation, manifest themselves. The CEO of PIA said that the airline is on track to lose 400 million USD this year, with debts and liabilities standing at 743 billion rupees, nearly 2.7 billion USD. To put that in perspective, that's nearly as much as the bailout we got from the IMF recently, which is a lot of funding for a company that only serves around 3% of the Pakistani population. Successive governments have had to bail the airline out because the government is the guarantor of all of PIA's loans. But it seems this might be changing as PIA hurtles towards privatization. We'll talk about that later too. Amidst mounting debt, PIA recently requested an emergency bailout, which was rejected by the Economic Coordination Committee, the ECC. The ECC also turned down the request for deferred payments to the FBR and the Civil Aviation Authority. The state doesn't seem too concerned about grounding the airline anymore, despite saying otherwise. Last month, the Federal Board of Revenue froze 13 PIA bank accounts. PSO has halted oil supply, citing non-payment of bills, which might cause the complete suspension of flights, some of which have already begun being suspended. Recently, it was reported that PIA received a loan of 17 billion rupees, not from the government though, and even more recently, reports stated that PIA was desperately trying to secure another 7 billion in bank loans to stay in the air. But no one's biting so far. Foreign financial advisories are being called in to look at PIA's assets and set the government on track to selling the core ones. So the government attention is clearly elsewhere. Once able to rival top airlines, PIA can barely keep its nose up anymore. In late September, prominent former PMLN minister Khwaja Asif called PIA a sick organization and suggested it be shut down and replaced with a newer airline run by the private sector, in line with PMLN policy. If you didn't know, selling national assets to the private sector is known as privatization. There have been several attempts to privatize PIA in the past. Pakistanis are used to big announcements with no follow-through, but the unelected caretaker government is adamant to fly with it this time. The privatization timeline was recently announced after the Cabinet Committee on Privatization added PIA to its privatization list and invoked emergency to hire financial advisors, announcing the goal of getting the airline ready for sale within 4 months, although the person in charge recently said that there is no real deadline for the sale. Details about buyers and consultants are still murky, although financials should be clearer by the end of the year. Visibility conditions are so poor that at the end of September, the Pakistan Stock Exchange wrote a letter demanding clearer information and messaging, out of concern for PIA stock. Even the people who are supposed to know these things are operating off of rumors and hearsay. PMLN's attempts to privatize have often led to intense and violent consequences. In 97, they even brought in consultants from the World Bank to try and make it happen, to no avail. In 2016, they had to compromise in the face of heavy union backlash during another attempt at privatization and passed a law that deemed it necessary for the federal government to retain 51% of the shares in PIA, a law which effectively made it illegal to transfer management to private entities. This Compromise Conversion Act actually sneakily reversed the 1956 PIA law, which acted as a major roadblock to privatization, an old law that made the government the sole owner of PIA. Just before the end of the PDM coalition government, the compromise law was reversed too, completely clearing the runway for a sale. So what's this about? To put it plainly, this is about the interference of politics, which many people think is the main source of PIA's struggles throughout history. While PMLN has maintained a pro-privatization stance for PIA and several other state-owned enterprises while in power, protesting against Musharraf's plan for privatization while in opposition, the Pakistan People's Party has mostly been against it. The allegedly pro-labor, pro-union party of the Bhutto family, in the name of which the famed hijacking of PIA Flight 326 was undertaken, recently expressed strong disapproval of the current plan to privatize PIA as well. Jamaat-e-Islami also has stakes in the union supported by PPP and MQN, People's Unity, which completely dominated the PIA referendum in 2018 against the PMLN-backed Air League. That means that in many regards, PPP, as the biggest party backing the People's Unity, has a lot of sway within PIA. But all major parties have unions within PIA, and both PMLN and PPP have been accused of stuffing the airline with its political appointees during their tenures, adding to the rhetoric of overstaffing. PPP accuses PMLN of trying to sell national assets for peanuts and undermining labor, and PMLN accuses PPP of hemorrhaging money and making Pakistan's astonishing debts even worse. There's a nugget of truth in both these accusations. These rifts also reflect the larger ideological rifts between the two major parties, which reports say are beginning to shine through on the runway up to the election. And where PTI stands in all of this is difficult to tell. They haven't had as much time and power, and during the time they had any say in national politics, PTI rejected privatization notions, but also undermined PIA extensively, and directly caused the reputation of the airline to plummet to unsustainable levels with the fake pilot scandal, which some aviation experts assert was a deliberate move. They also have a union in PIA called Insaf Front. So who can really tell what they might have done with more time? The fake pilot scandal was a death blow to any hopes of PIA's recovery. Former Aviation Minister Ghulam Sarwar publicly claimed that 1/3 of Pakistani pilots have fake licenses, only a month after a devastating plane crash in Karachi caused by pilot error claimed 97 of the 99 lives on board. PIA already had a spotty safety record. Since 1965, 757 people have been killed as a result of PIA accidents. So it was believable enough to both the domestic and international public that they would be a part of such shady practices, even if it wasn't the truth. In fact, it turned out not to be, and was instead a crude misrepresentation. But as a direct result of the claim, long-haul routes through Europe and North America are indefinitely grounded. But back to the legacy of the legacy parties. One of the biggest roadblocks in the past to privatization has been the union strikes that take place at the mere mention of change within PIA. During PMLN's IMF loan negotiation in 2013, the IMF stipulated that 26% of PIA's shares must be sold. This sparked mass protests from the PPP-backed union, 2 deaths, and the Conversion Act compromise. The Pakistani government currently owns a 92% share in PIA. And this current privatization attempt is no different in terms of backlash. At the end of August, police arrested 2 People's Unity officials during a raid on a PIA booking office. This came after nationwide protests staged outside PIA offices by their employees. To ease staff concerns, Information Minister Murtaza Solanki stated that, oddly, privatization would not cause any staff to lose their jobs. Opinion writers have stated that this might deter any potential buyers. On top of that, the PIA administration has filed FIRs against hundreds of its own protesting workers. With our national carrier, you can always trust your in-flight meal to come with a side of drama. So, how come privatization seems so certain now? Well, all the different years of financial and general mismanagement, political interference, and a bizarre record of crime has led many people to believe that the government has no place in this business, or any business for that matter. Afsar Malik, a specialist in Pakistani aviation and an expert on the topic, believes that opposition to privatization is purely for political point-scoring purposes. He says that privatization is the best option going forward, that it is not the job of the government to be doing business, because, Let's be honest, our government hasn't had a successful track record here. He further provided the example of Air India, the loss-making airline that was sold to the Indian Tata Group in 2022. It is now reportedly doing a lot better because of it. Many people believe similarly that the current caretaker government's push to privatize, bolstered by the army-backed Special Investment Facilitation Council, SIFC, has been a long time coming. The SIFC, spearheaded by General Asim Munir, has been tied with the PIA process throughout, although the official stance is that it's not an SIFC project. Maybe this specific Khaki light is why they've gotten farther than anyone else has before. A recommended debt restructuring process and the privatization process are both well underway, simultaneously. The Cabinet Committee on Privatization, CCOP, and the Privatization Commission Board are chaired by the same person, Fawad Hassan Fawad, which means the institutional oversight is minimal, and a lot of these legal approval processes might just be for show, although they obviously deny this. Fawad has insisted that the sale is unavoidable. He's made it clear that the focus is on getting PIA debt-free or clean before putting it up for sale. That's why attaining financial advisors has been declared an emergency. To spectators, it seems that those in power have already decided to put PIA up for sale, and they're not waiting for the next election to allow for their plans to be derailed. Resistance is alive, however. Employees told DW that they're not buying the official government line that their jobs and pensions are safe, a claim which is a little difficult to believe. They believe the narrative is skewed against them. Executives get paid hefty salaries and make lavish purchases such as hotels and simulators and planes at exorbitant prices. And then the blame is placed on employees who act as scapegoats for all of PIA's ills. PIA's staffing is often placed high in the list of problems PIA has, and some in the staff believe that this is another case of the powerful misusing their influence over public opinion. Seems the resistance might be futile this time around, however, as the caretaker government backed by the army has not left much room for dissent, conducting raids in the homes of PIA union leaders and locking up union offices. Protests look fated to crash. So, to sum up, pro-privatization forces say that PIA is a huge drain on the Pakistani economy, that there is nothing that can be done to save it as a government entity, and that detractors are motivated by political factors. Detractors claim that this is an anti-worker move in a time when people really need their jobs, and that the government is betraying PIA in search of easy money. Whether any of this will benefit the Pakistani people is another large question mark at the end of this very long sentence. But keep watching us and we'll keep updating you on the latest happenings in the Pakistani skies. Stay in the know with Samcho. What are your thoughts on the imminent privatization? Tell us about your views in the comments below. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more.